we talked last week about how to understand problems you're facing, and sort of before you even get started with solving a problem or trying to solve a problem, understand the nature of the problem you're facing. And I wanted to follow that up today with the second part. So the first thing we talked about last week was, what color was your problem? And we went through the 4 colors of problem, and this had to deal with the nature of the problem and the psychological response you as a leader would find. Now, again, this is on the YouTube channel as a segment, but the 4 colors are: green problems are obstacles. They're barriers, you get over them, they're behind you, they're pretty easy to deal with. Yellow problems are dilemmas. Dilemmas don't have an obvious right answer. They're going to be sort of how to pick between least worst options. Red problems are quandaries. That's where, in addition to being a dilemma, there's ambiguity of information, there's uncertainty, there's it's a future problem, so you don't have to solve it right now, but the level of ambiguity and uncertainty causes a lot of difficulty in picking what's the right course of action to do. And then purple problems are predicaments. A predicament is a quandary whose time has arrived. You know, quandary, you're out there in the future, you have to solve this problem. Predicament, you have to solve it right now. So we went over these last week. These are the colors of problems. What I wanted to do today was sort of expand on this with talk about problem types. So problem types get into a little bit more detail of the nature of the problem you're facing and how you can think of it in 2 ways. And this is presented in this chart, and anyone who's seen me in my consulting engagements, I use this chart all the time to explain types of problems. And just to clear it, on the left hand, the vertical axis is how hard is it to get agreement among stakeholders. And you see it goes from easy to hard. And we call this, in systems thinking, we call this behavioral complexity. This is about, you may have stakeholders who have different values, different vocabularies, different way of thinking about problems. They may even recognize different kinds of problems. There might not be agreement on what a problem is between different stakeholders. So the higher you go up in here, the higher your behavioral complexity and the more different types of stakeholders you're dealing with and those challenges of behavior. On the lower axis, the horizontal, is how hard is it to identify a solution? And this has to do with something we call dynamic complexity. When it's easy, you can see the steps in a row. It's kind of like following a cooking recipe. If you fail to put in an ingredient, you understand where you made the mistake. Dynamic complexity, there's a lot of interlocking pieces and parts and moving items, and these interrelationships and the sheer complexity of the dynamics makes it very difficult to understand where the problem is, how it's being recorded. And these 2 dimensions combine to create the 4 types of problems we usually deal with. So when you have low behavioral complexity and low dynamic complexity, you have what's called a tame problem. These are, everyone shares the same vocabulary. You know, Mike's on here, he has an electrical background, right? Everyone going into electrical backgrounds, they have the same certifications, they have the same vocabulary, they're working from the same understandings for the most part, they know each other's languages, they generally agree on what a problem is not. There's a high degree of uniformity, so there's low behavioral complexity. It may still be dynamically complex, but if you're doing simple wiring, you know how the wire is put together and you can understand that. Same thing with other business problems. Accounting, for example, tends to be tame problems where people share the same language and it's very well documented what's going on. But as you increase in behavioral complexity, if you simply increase the behavioral complexity, think about if you were trying to cook in a kitchen and you had 5 chefs, right? The old saying is, too many chefs in the kitchen spoil the meal. That's because it's increasing the behavioral complexity. There's more people, they may disagree on how, think about Thanksgiving dinner. There's mom's way to cook it, there's grandma's way to cook it, there's dad's way of cooking it, there may be your uncle carves it this way, or there's all these things and these beliefs and understanding. Even on something as simple as cooking Thanksgiving dinner, you begin to have behavioral complexity, and we call these wicked problems. Wicked because you may think you have a solution, but because someone else sees the problem in a different way or doesn't understand the language and values with which you're speaking of, they may disagree with the solution because they have a different perspective. These are wicked problems. If you increase the dynamic complexity, but you keep it low behavioral complexity, we call that a mess or a messy problem. It's kind of like a bowl of spaghetti. You can't figure out, all these noodles are dumped in a bowl together. You can't figure out where one strand starts and the other one ends. It's all interlocking and it's really hard to untangle. And the problem with messy problems is that it's not as easy to reduce it and get to that obvious clean solution, because you may have rapidly changing information. It may be hard to get information. There may be lots of things to consider in your information. Again, this isn't about behaviors. This is just the dynamic complexity of the problem itself. And when you combine these two, when you have a problem of high behavioral complexity and high dynamic complexity, you have what we call a wicked mess. And these are the hardest problems of all to solve, in that you have really complex, intricate problems to analyze. But on top of that, you have a wide amount of audiences that have different values and perceptions and beliefs. The way they define problems, the kinds of things they look to solve problems, all vary. And this is most of the problems we face in the, in a complex business, at a certain level, become wicked messes. You could certainly say it about the country too, because of obviously there's polarization and the differences of opinions between the political groups. But even in businesses and companies, when you start getting problems that no one can easily pick out the analytical answer, and there's different beliefs of what's the right way to fix this, what's the right approach to do, you may see these type of wicked messes emerge. And this is where we spend a lot of our time trying to work with folks, is when they're in these types of problems. Now, over the last 25 years, I've done dozens of improvement projects. So each one of these little squares is kind of a notional problem-solving project I've been involved in. And it was interesting to me when I mapped this out. Generally, the problems I ran into fell in this band, and they sort of notionally in a band here, where there was the super easy problems. They didn't want to pay for a consultant, so they didn't bring me in. I might have one there, but there's no return on investment. These can be solved in-house or with existing resources. Then there's a wide, very dense band of problems that range from the tame. Some start going into the wicked, some start getting into the messes, but they definitely didn't get too much in the wicked messes, because the belief was that problem was too hard. Now, keep in mind, from my background, I have a background in Lean, Six Sigma, Agile, those sort of process improvements. And the tools that we use for process improvement lended itself well to solving problems in this space, but kind of broke down when we try to get in problems of these space. So I might have a couple projects there, but not a whole lot. And over that time, I learned that each of these quadrants has a different set of tools, that if you know what kind of problem you're facing, you should pick the right tool for the job. So this is just a sort of a quick snapshot. But tame problems, this is where your lean Kaizen, your Six Sigma green belts, maybe some structured systems thinking comes in. But as you get into wicked problems, this is more where you're trying to get everyone to sing from the same sheet of music or to read from the same page. So things like cultural change, change management techniques, structured systems thinking that are based on collaboration, mental models, understanding the personas and how they differ, those sort of structured systems thinking tools, lean leader behaviors. These are all tools that are designed to reconcile those differences between groups. That's where this, down in the mess though, this is where you need your heavy stats, your math analytics, your projects like that. So this is where your Six Sigma Black Belt projects come in, your predictive analytics like machine learning, AI, things like that, even simulation science, using agent-based model or system dynamics. Wicked mess, this is where prescriptive analytics comes most in handy, and a full system dynamics, because here you have to map not just quantified dynamic complexity, but also that behavioral complexity of people interacting in the system and all of these pieces working together. Now, this can seem daunting, that if you have a wicked mess problem, it's very hard to solve it in the wicked mess space. But one of the tricks I've learned over time is that no matter where you are in this chart, you can use tools to move it to a different part of the chart. So say we had a wicked mess, and our company was not good at the math, but we really were good at the diplomacy and the cultural change. We might use those tools to switch it from a wicked mess down into a mess by resolving the behavioral complexity, getting everyone to understand and at least talk in the same way. It de-escalates a wicked mess problem into a messy problem. You still need to solve it, and that's hard with the math, but you've taken the wicked component out of it. Likewise, if you're really good at analytics, you're an engineering company, you're really strong on that part, you may be able to do the analysis that moves a wicked mess into a wicked problem space. And you can actually, in some projects, over a series of time, I've done some things where you go from a wicked mess to a wicked problem to a tame problem, and then you solve it in the tame problem space. It seems laborious, but that's actually faster than trying to solve it in the wicked mess space. So just keep in mind when you face these kinds of problems, understanding what type of problem you're facing in addition to its color and what that means in terms of tool sets and how you can use them and how you might shift it is really important when you get into problem solving, especially in complex systems, because these types of complex systems are going to tend to be less of the obstacles. They're going to be more of the dilemmas, the quandaries, and the predicaments, which are already psychologically harder to solve. So don't get yourself wrapped up too much in trying to solve a wicked mess problem in the wicked mess space. If you can shift it and de-escalate either that dynamic or behavioral complexity, that can help a great deal. Appreciate your time today. If you have any questions on structured systems thinking, have a problem you'd like our help on, or want to know more about developing your own capabilities in systems thinking, please reach out at the email below. We'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in what we do and want to follow our journey, I've added our LinkedIn and Twitter information. And we plan to regularly update this channel with quick tips and case studies to help you get the most out of your systems thinking and lean efforts. If you want to be notified whenever we add new video content, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the red subscribe button below this video.